We'll probably be getting a little pop-up. There we go. So welcome to those of you joining us on YouTube now. Housekeeping. If you have a question, please go ahead and use that Q&A box. That lets everybody see your question, and it also makes it easier for us to find them all. Questions can sometimes get lost in the chat, but we'll answer them whenever we see them at the end of the presentation. I'm also joined today by Jan Rail, who is our DuPage County Director, and she's going to be helping me to moderate the chat and the Q&A. She's also going to be taking over for me for about a week when I go on vacation at the end of June. So thank you to Jan for helping out today. For your safety, you should only be able to see what I post in chat, but just in case I missed a setting or something, don't click on any links other than what I might post. Then on the TCF side, these webinars are offered free to the public, but we do encourage you to consider a donation or membership. The more people we have attending these webinars, the more it costs us to run them. And I should mention, we did get word, because these have been so popular, I have been given the go-ahead to continue these for the coming future. So we will continue to do these webinars as long as we have people coming. They may change looks a little bit. We may not be doing them twice a week. As people start going back to work, we may play with the time to see if an evening time works better, but just know these webinars will continue. So keep an eye on our website for more information. At the end of the webinar, you're going to be taken to a page with a bunch of resources of things you might be interested in, including our virtual tip jar. So if you're enjoying these webinars, I do encourage you to donate to help keep us running. That also makes you a member, so you get to enjoy our wide variety of members-only stuff. Upcoming webinars: on Monday, we will be joined by the previous mentioned CEO Brooke McDonald, who's going to be covering how to talk to your neighbors about conservation. TCF has helped local forest preserve districts and other entities do some polling, and just to kind of get a feel for how people feel about conservation and what is important to them regarding conservation. And we're going to be able to take this data and sort of extrapolate from that to get an understanding of, regardless what side of the aisle you're on, regardless your age, what do people care about, and how can we come together to have this conversation about conservation. And then on Thursday, we will be joined by a representative from the Dark Skies Initiative, who's going to be talking about saving dark skies and the importance of helping to prevent light pollution. So definitely looking forward to that one. That's going to be a really good one too. So please make sure you join us next week. Now I'm going to throw a link in the chat here just before I forget. It's to Upcycle, which is a company that we partner with to sell our rain barrels, but they also sell compost bins. So if you don't have a compost bin, if you need a new compost bin, they sell a couple of them. So that link there, you'll see a bunch of stuff about rain barrels, but if you scroll most of the way to the bottom, you'll also see where you can get compost bins there too. All right, now without further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about compost. You should be able to see my screen now. And there we go. So let's talk about composting. There's my contact information. If you have a question after this webinar and you're looking to get a hold of me, that's how you do it. Email is better than phone right now. I'm still pretty much working from home, even though I do get my voicemails. Email is just generally a better way to get a hold of me. So please feel free to send me an email at any point if you have any questions, if there's anything I can help you with. And even if you're outside of Will County, I can hopefully help find somebody who can help you. So we are the Conservation Foundation. This is our mission statement. And our whole goal here is to protect the health of our communities. Yes, we're saving land, we're saving waters, but at the end of the day, it helps to protect our health as well as the health of our ecosystems. And we are also accredited, which, believe me when I say it, is a very big deal. It was a lot of work to get that, but it's a way for us to prove to the national organization that we are doing things the right way. This map here kind of shows you the areas that we work in. We have helped to preserve over 35,000 acres, and we're still going. So even though most of us have been staying at home for a while now, starting to get out again, land deals don't stop. So that's still going. And We work a lot with conservation easements and really all over the area here. So we also partner with some organizations outside of this area. So again, if you're joining us from Lake County or from Indiana, we have other partners that we work with who can help you. All right, so let's get down to it here. What is composting? Well, composting is taking things like yard waste, kitchen scraps, things like that, putting them all together and coming up with healthy, rich soil that helps us to grow our plants better. Why should you compost? Well, first off, the average American household, in all of the trash, everything that they throw out, about 25 to 50% of that is organic waste. So it's a way to remove that from our trash stream and keep it out of the landfills and help put it back into the soil and help to improve the soil so that we can grow more stuff. It also reduces methane. As that stuff breaks down in a landfill, it produces methane. When we compost it, it doesn't. And it also just helps us to create healthier soils, use fewer chemical fertilizer, and it saves you money too. So again, it saves us money because we're not putting it into the landfill, so that's less stress on our landfills. We don't have to spend money on fertilizers and buying compost because we're creating it ourselves from our own waste. There's a lot of different types of composters. This isn't even everything, but these are some of the more common types. So the two you see on the upper and lower left there, the plastic stationary and the tumbling, those are the ones that Upcycle offers. So we can help you get those through Upcycle. You can order them off the website that I posted in the chat. Stationary composters are just that. It's just a barrel, you throw everything into it, and you take everything out at the end. In a tumbling composter, you see it's kind of on a stand like that. So you put your stuff in it, and then you spin it. And as you spin it, that helps to oxygenate it, and it helps things to break down faster. It's a little bit more work. You can't really fill them up as full. I've got one of these. I made the mistake of filling it too full, and then we couldn't tumble it anymore because it was just too heavy. So you kind of have to pay attention to what you're putting in there and understand you can't just fill it up and think it's still going to work. There's a lot of different DIY varieties. That one's made with pallets. I thought was pretty cool. Or you can also make them out of that chicken wire that you see there. I've seen it done using like the hurricane fencing, you know, that orange plastic fencings. Sometimes they call it snow fencing. Anything like that. You can go super fancy and make a 3-bin composter. The idea of that one is you start with your first bin, you throw everything in there, and when it starts to get full, you use a pitchfork or a shovel or something and shovel it all into the second bin. Then you continue to feed the first bin again. When that first bin gets full, you take the second bin, throw the second bin into the third side, throw the first one into the second one, and start feeding the first one again. So that hopefully by the time your first bin is full for the third time, your third bin should be done. It's a way to help keep it oxygenated and just keep things moving. And I'm sure you can figure out the one that's probably least acceptable in most of our suburban neighborhoods, and that is just the open pile. Issues with that one, you know, obviously you could have some animal scavengers in there. Really better on a place like a farm or someplace that has a lot of land that, you know, your neighbors aren't going to complain about it. So, and again, there are probably hundreds of more types, but these are kind of help you get the idea of what a composter might look like. So what can you compost at home? If it has ever been a plant at any point in that item's life, then generally, yes, you can compost it. So all of our kitchen scraps, the apple cores, the grape stems, the banana peels, the lettuce that got wilted before you had a chance to use it, paper is a very necessary part. So all of my junk mail gets shredded. Old receipts, bills, you know, everything. You know, all that paper, all of that, just shred all the paper because you're going to need a lot of it. Yard waste, rather than paying for a sticker and a bag, put it in your compost. Obviously, any sticks, things like that are going to have to be broken up into smaller pieces, but it can all go right into your compost. Even things like cotton yarn can go into your compost. Anything that, again, has ever been a plant in its life cycle. So cereals, breads, somebody said old stale beer, you know, anything, again, anything that's ever been a plant goes in there. If it came from an animal, then no. So dairy, meats, fish, eggs, except there's a little asterisk on that. So all of that, keep it out. Oils, you know, if you have a salad, but it has dressing on it, you unfortunately don't want to compost it at that point. Oils and meats and things can create lots of odors, and the normal decomposers can't really handle that stuff very well. So you're inviting raccoons and pests to your compost if you try to compost this stuff. I mean, technically it can be done, but generally just don't. So again, that little asterisk is here. So exceptions to the no animal products rule are eggshells. Eggshells are actually very good for your home compost because that adds a little bit of calcium to it. Also, the other cool thing that eggshells can do is if you have any garden pests, the little small soft-bodied things that you're trying to keep out of your garden, the sharp edges on the eggshells can actually pierce their skin and help you control pests. It kills them. So it can help you control pests in your garden. So it's a great natural way to do pest control. So when you have those eggshells, you want to kind of crunch them up a little bit, rinse them out, crunch them up, throw them right in your compost. Hair. So I just got a haircut. Some of you might notice if you've been in my webinars before, I look a lot less like a sheepdog now. The hair that got cut off can go into your home composter. Pet hair, as long as it's not been treated. You don't, if you're treating your dog for fleas and ticks and things like that, you probably don't want to throw that in there. But as long as you're not, you know, as you brush your dog out or whatever, that can go in there too. And also fingernail clippings. I know it's kind of gross, but you know, that could go in there too. Again, probably not if they're painted, but as long as they're not painted, you know, you can put nail clippings in there too. So an important thing to think about as you're putting things in your bin is you need to have a mix of browns and greens. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's about 40-60. So you want about 40% greens, 60% browns. Greens are your fresh stuff. So your fruit and vegetable scraps from your lunch, you know, the leftover salad makings, your carrot from peeling your carrots, peeling apples, whatever, all that stuff, that's all green. Browns, on the other hand, that's more of the, what you would think of as like the dead stuff. So dead leaves, cardboard, paper, you know, toilet paper cores, you can put those in there. You know, you want to shred up your paper, shred up your cardboard, but all of that can go in there. Fireplace ashes, all of that stuff. Definitely need that shredded newspaper. All of that stuff is considered browns. Having that mix in there, it helps you to balance the carbon and the nitrogen. So it also helps you balance moisture too. Browns have a tendency to be drier, while greens have a tendency to be wet. So if you're too heavy on your greens, your compost is going to get to be too wet. So that's why you want to have that nice mix in there. And again, don't add dairy, meat, fats, oils. Oh, you also don't want to put like litter box. If you have a cat, don't put the waste from the litter box in there. And take the stickers off your produce. I can't tell you how many stickers, banana stickers I find in my garden, you know, a year or two later because they're still there. They don't break down. So make sure you take those stickers off too. Or like me, you're going to be finding them in your soil. So how does composting work? Well, you start with that organic waste and you add to that the soil microorganisms. So if your compost pile is in contact with the ground, those microorganisms are just going to kind of migrate up through there. If you are in a bin, like one of those tumbling bins, sometimes just taking a scoop of soil and throwing it in there, just a scoop of dirt, and throw it in there, that helps to kind of jumpstart those microorganisms a little bit. You add to that water and air, carbon dioxide and heat come out, and you end up with your finished compost. So thank you, How Stuff Works, for that really nice graphic. It's a really nice way of seeing like what goes in, what comes out, and then we're done. So how do you know that your compost is done? First of all, it should smell earthy. It shouldn't smell sour. It shouldn't smell bad. It should just smell kind of like when you take a walk in the woods and you have that earthy, woodsy smell. That's what it should smell like. It should also have a dry, crumbly appearance. If it's done, you won't see any or very many bits of visible food scraps there. The volume should go down 50 to 75%. I mean, you're going to go way, way down on that. And then your temperature, if you're interested in looking at that kind of thing, should actually be under 100 degrees Fahrenheit after turning. Remember we said heat comes out. So having, when you turn your compost, that kind of jump starts it a little bit. So it will heat up again, unless it's done. If it's done, it won't. Again, you can manage your compost as much or as little as you want. So if you're not interested in really getting in there and as I would say, being super nerdy about it, like I would be, you don't have to take the temperature or anything like that. If it looks like soil, it's done. So fixing common problems. You don't have a lot of problems with compost generally. There's not a whole lot of different issues that you could see, but there's a few. And so I'm addressing a few here on what you might see and how you could fix them. So first off, if it's too wet, you're going to have symptoms like you might have flies, it might smell bad, and it might look slimy. If you see that, that tells you it's probably too wet. So you need to turn it to add some air to it to help dry it out. And you also want to add more browns to it. So more leaves, more shredded paper, cardboard, fireplace ash, things like that. Add more of those browns in there, more dry stuff to kind of help dry it out. Turn it a little bit. That should help dry it out and fix your problems. Might take a day or two to get back into that equilibrium, but that will help. Another issue you might see is that it might seem too dry. And at that point, you're going to see things are going to not be decomposing. They're just going to be kind of drying out. They may not even be molding so much if it's too dry. So at that point, just add water. You can also add more greens or more wet materials to it. But sometimes just taking a watering can and or a hose and just sprinkling some water on there, turning it a little bit again to help incorporate that water. And then that should solve that problem. If it's too acidic, your bin's going to smell. And generally things become too acidic if you're putting a lot of citrus in there. I know my family goes through so many bags of the cuties in the wintertime. It's nice to have, that fresh kind of produce in the winter. But if we put too many orange peels in there, our bin can start to go acidic. So at that point, we stop putting the citrus in there, and at that point it just goes in the trash. You can also add lime or wood ash, and I don't mean limes like the citrus lime. I mean like the white powdery lime, or wood ash. Any of those, put those in there. Again, stir it up a bit, and you should be good to go. Again, this isn't even a super common problem, but it can be if you're putting say you juiced a whole bunch of lemons and threw them in, threw the rinds in there, then that might affect the pH of your bin. Vermi composting is composting with worms. Now, my family has had a vermi compost bin for over 15 years. My husband and I started one, And when we started, we had one kind of like what you see in the middles, DIY. We took a couple of Rubbermaid containers, and you want to have them stacked like you see in that image on the right there, because you want to be able to feed the top part while worms and things are still working in the bottom. And it helps you to be able to regulate the bins a little bit more. So you're always feeding the top one. And then once that gets full, you add another one on top. So on the one on the left, that's what we're using now. That's a commercial kit that we purchased. They're about $100. But you start with one tray. And once that tray gets full, you add the second tray on top. Once that tray gets full, you add the next one. By the time your top tray gets full, your bottom tray should be pretty much done. Those trays have holes in the bottom so that the worms can work their way up. The worms are going to go where the food is and away from their waste. It makes sense, right? So they want to go where the food is. So they will migrate their way up through those layers as they work through the food. So again, by the time you get to that top layer gets full, your bottom layer, there should be very few worms left in it. And what's left in there should be rich vermicompost. Now, one of the reasons to vermicompost as opposed to using a regular compost bin is it goes much faster. A regular compost bin might take 3 months to break things down. In a vermicompost, it'll be maybe 3 weeks. So it goes a whole lot faster. You need more shredded paper, definitely. Shredded paper is the best kind of brown to use in a vermicompost, but you can also put cardboard in there. You can throw leaves in there. Over the winter, we weren't eating a whole bunch of produce, but we had enough, and the worms had slowed down enough that our bin started to get too wet and we needed some more browns. My husband actually went out and bought a cheap bag of mulch and threw some of the mulch in there, and that was just enough brown to get our bin back into equilibrium again. So, but the worms work really fast, and the castings that come out are even richer than what you would get from a regular compost. You also get the benefit of getting a worm tea out of this. If you notice, both of the diagrams on there show a little tap, and having that tap on there is a way to help get water, excess water, out of your bin, which is always a good thing. The tap on ours, we have one at the office, got closed one time. I don't know who closed it, got closed. And I noticed all of a sudden there were flies in my bin. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Flip that tap and a whole bunch of water came out. And as soon as I did that, within a day, the flies were gone. So that tea, though, that comes out of the bottom is a fantastic liquid fertilizer. You want to water it down about 10-to-1, so 10 parts water to 1 part tea. But I use it to water my houseplants, and they love it. So worm tea is a great natural fertilizer that you can use, and is another benefit of having that vermicompost. And again, we take this vermicompost, we put it in our garden. I have a picture, I couldn't find it in time, but I have a picture of a garden bed. We have we call them square foot gardens. And we had tomatoes in one, and then we had just started this new bin. So we had put a bunch of worm compost in there and tilled it up, planted tomatoes in the old bin, or in the old bed and the new bed. The tomatoes in the old bed were looking good. The plants were nice and healthy. The tomatoes in the new bed were like, they were huge. My husband is 6'4", and I have a picture of him going like this, looking in the top of the plant, standing on his tiptoes, because the plants were just so huge. So plants, especially nutrient heavy plants like tomatoes, love vermicompost. And it's important when you start your vermicomposting that you use the right kind of worms. You want to use red wigglers. You can find them at any bait store. You can order them online. There's plenty of, the Worm Guy or something like that. Plenty of places like that where you can buy red wigglers for your vermicomposting. Those are the kinds you want to use. You don't want to use night crawlers. Night crawlers are the big fat ones you use a lot for fishing. You can actually use them both for fishing. Another benefit of having a vermicompost is if you like to go fishing, you've got free worms whenever you want them. But the issue here is where they work. Red wigglers work just under the leaf litter. So they're decomposing all of the fresh stuff, working away really hard. Night crawlers live deeper in the soil. And so they're working at more stuff that's already existing in the soil, not breaking down the fresher stuff. So they're not going to work as fast, and you're going to have more problems with your bin if you try to use night crawlers. So red wigglers are the type to use. Now, problems you might have with this, as I mentioned earlier, we had an issue with some fruit flies on there. It generally means it's too wet or you've got too much food in there. So the solution for both of them really is to add more paper, open the lid, again, which will help it to dry out a little bit, open the drain if your drain got closed. Fruit flies also lay their eggs right on the fresh stuff, but they won't go underneath. So if you've got exposed food sitting at the surface, that's what they're going to be attracted to. So put a layer of paper over the top of that exposed food, your fruit flies will be gone. They can't get right to it, they won't find it. If your bin smells bad, which it shouldn't, a healthy bin should really have almost no odor to it at all. Again, maybe a little bit of an earthy smell, sort of that woodsy, fresh dirt kind of smell, but it shouldn't smell bad. I've kept my worm bin in my house, in my basement for years, and nobody ever knew. Because there's no odor, there's no bugs, it was fine. I've got it in my garage now, and it's fine there too. It can be a little trickier to maintain the temperature there. And that's also why you don't really want to have it outside, because if it's outside in the sun, it'll dry out too much and get too hot. If it's outside in the winter, it'll freeze and kill your worms. So again, your bin shouldn't smell. If it does, it's too wet and too much food. So again, cut back on feeding it, give the worms a chance to catch up, and add more paper, open the lid, open the drain. So if you are interested in becoming more involved with the Conservation Foundation, there's a few things that you can do. You can become a member, again, with donations. Any donation gives you a membership. You can also visit us at the McDonald Farm in Naperville or our Dixon Merced Farm in Montgomery. Definitely follow us on social media though, because then you'll find out about more webinars and all the other really great stuff that we've been doing. So I highly encourage you, follow us on Facebook, we're on Insta, we're on Twitter, and definitely on YouTube, so you can find more of the webinars too. And you can also get your yards certified. We have a conservation at home program for homeowners who are interested in treating their yards in a better way, more environmentally friendly way. So definitely feel free to give us a call if you're interested in that. Our yard visits are free, so we're happy to talk with you further on that. And with that, at this point, I am happy to take questions. So let me see, I know we've got a couple of questions here and things showing up in the chat.
So you want me to read you the questions, Jamie?
Yeah, if you would, Jan, go ahead.
Sure. The first question is from Teresa, and she says, can tea leaves be composted?
Yes, absolutely. Tea leaves, again, because they were a plant, they can be composted. I put all of my tea leaves in there. You have to be careful with the bags though. So if it's loose tea, absolutely put it all in there. If it is a papery kind of bag, so think like the Lipton teas, those paper bags absolutely can go in there. If, okay, however, you have the more, I think they're silk bags, the pyramid shaped ones, those are actually plastic. They do not compost. And I have talked to some of my favorite tea companies. I'm a huge tea drinker. I have talked to some of my favorite tea companies who make those to say, hey, look, I want to compost. I can't compost these, so help me out here. Let's figure out a better type of bag that we can compost with that. So the pyramid bags are a no, paper bags, yes, loose tea leaves, yes.
Okay, the next question is from Deb, and she says, what about poultry manure and feathers?
Feathers, I believe, are a yes. Poultry manure, I believe. So generally the issue with putting manure into a vegetable plant type of compost is if it doesn't get hot enough in there, it's not going to kill off any of the pathogens. So generally with any kind of manure, be it horse, cow, chicken, you want to let those sit kind of in their own piles to age, because you want them to age like a year or so. So I would be concerned about it throwing off the chemistry of your bin. I'd have to read up a little bit more on that, though. I'm not 100. I don't have chickens, so I'm not 100% certain. But the feathers, I don't see there being a problem with.
Okay, the next question is from Teresa. She said, is vermi compost or worm casting compost for soil amendment or a plant fertilizer?
Both. So it's very high in nutrients. So you're not just going, I wouldn't, if you're transplanting a plant or something, I wouldn't fill the entire container with it, but it's a good amendment, but it's also fertilizer too. So I can, when I'm starting my garden beds in the spring, I'll throw a little bit on the surface and till it in a bit. If I'm planting new plants, when I dig the hole, I may put a little bit of worm castings in the hole with the new plants. Periodically, I'll take a little bit and sprinkle it on the surface of my house plants. But I also know people who will take it and use a spreader, like one of those fertilizer spreaders, load a bunch of dry compost in there and walk it around their yard. So it spreads out across their grass. So it's also a way you can fertilize your lawns with it as well.
Okay, the next question is, how do you winter red wrigglers?
If you don't want them to freeze. So again, you can keep them inside. I know people who have had like a smaller composter that they actually keep right under their sink. Because there's really no odor to it, nobody even knows it's there. So it doesn't cause any problems. So I would really have them inside over the winter. I had my garage is insulated. So over the winter, mine was in the garage that was insulated. Things slowed down, but the worms were fine. That's the other thing. The colder the worms get, the slower they work. It's kind of like me too. I like being warm better than I like being cold. So the worms really slow down when it's cold out. So if you can keep them where it's warmer, that will keep them working faster.
Okay, the next question is, how should you add the compost to a garden during the year?
There's a couple ways you can do it. So in the spring, when you first go to plant stuff, you can throw a bunch of it on top and just sort of turn it into the soil. You can also, while you have the plants there, if you want to add a little bit for fertilizer, you can just add it on top and just sort of sprinkle it right on top. You can also add a little bit when you plant the plants. I've read you don't want the plant to have like different types of soil or to encounter different types of soil. So dig a really big hole before you plant your plant, put the compost in there, either the worm compost or the regular compost, mix it up really well, and then put your plant in it. So that way it doesn't have like super high nutrients and nothing. Like you don't want it to have that layered effect. So the more you can kind of mix it into the soil and get it all sort of mixed up in there together, the better.
Okay, the next question is, are coffee grounds okay for compost?
Absolutely, they're fantastic for compost. I always joke that we have some of the best caffeinated worms in the area. Starbucks, obviously pre-COVID, for a while would actually give away big containers of their coffee grounds for compost. So yeah, coffee grounds are great. Obviously you want them used because use them first. But if you use it with a filter, with just a regular paper filter, all of that paper filter and all can go right into your compost. If you're doing a Keurig, obviously those containers aren't. So if you want to like take them apart and dump out the coffee grounds and then throw everything else away, it's a lot of work, but you can do it. There are other types of coffee makers that have the little pods that are, it's almost like a coffee filter sandwich with the coffee grounds in between. That whole thing can go right into your compost too. We have a coffee maker like that instead of the Keurig for exactly that reason, because we can compost that entire little pod instead of having to throw out all of those little containers.
Okay, the next question is, I want to keep my vermicomposter outside. How do I keep the worms from freezing? They don't freeze in nature.
They don't freeze in nature because they're in the ground. So they're able to dig down far enough that they're not going to freeze. When you have a vermicompost, it's above ground and the whole thing is going to freeze through. So you really have to be able to bring it in, even if you bring it into a garage up against the house or, you know, somewhere where you're going to protect it from the weather. You really just can't leave it outside because it's too exposed. In nature, again, they're able to dig down and get far enough down in the soil where they can sort of hibernate and do their thing without freezing. When we have it outside above ground, the whole thing's going to freeze through. So you've got to be able to bring it in, even if it's just into your garage or someplace where it's going to be protected from freezing.
Okay. The next question is, are you concerned with using eggshells in the compost bin, cutting the organisms, microorganisms?
Not really. In my experience, the eggshells do more good than they do harm. Because they're in the soil, like the microorganisms, the microorganisms aren't going to get cut because the eggshells are just too big. It's more the grubs and slugs and things like that that you don't want eating your plants that are going to be disturbed by the eggshells.
Okay, the question from Candace says, what about using lint from the dryer?
You have to be careful with lint from the dryer. It depends on the clothes. Polyesters and things like that, those fibers don't really break down, or they don't break down very fast. So if your load is like, say, all cotton socks, then fine, you can definitely put it in there. But if your clothes are more synthetics, those fibers aren't going to break down as easily as, say, cotton fibers will.
Okay, from Amanda, it says, are there any specific materials you would recommend when building your own compost bin?
It depends on how you want to build it. Like I said, there are as many ways to build it as you can think of. If you're going to build more of a structured wooden kind of bin, I mean, 2x4s, just, go out and get your pine 2x4s. And it's, you make it as nice as you want to, or as you can. If you can use chicken wire. If you're not real handy and able to build stuff, just, put in 4 stakes in the ground and wrap some chicken wire around it. There's your compost. It's really up to you and how you want to do it. But, maybe watch out for the treated lumber. I know a lot of lumber is treated. If you could get Trex, the plastic recycled lumber, that's really good too. You get the bonus of you don't have to worry about it breaking down over time. So, that too. But yeah, I mean, you can use anything.
Okay, the next question is, will the ink from print on paper damage the compost pile?
No. The ink on paper, generally they're vegetable-based dyes that they use in newspaper ink. If you're really concerned, you can call the newspaper office and find out what kind of inks that they use. If you're really concerned about it, maybe don't use the shiny, colorful ads. Sometimes those dyes can have other things in them, but just generic newspaper, black and white newspaper, that should all be vegetable based, so you should be fine there.
Okay, the next question says, can you use eggshells from boiled eggs, or do they need to be unboiled?
Both. You can use both. So whether it's a hard boiled egg or an egg you cracked baking cakes, you can tell what I've been doing lately. Any of those, eggshells, they're all fine. You can use all of them. So.
Okay, and those are all the questions in the question and answer, but there is some in the chat, and it says, what is the best way to stir in a stationary plastic container?
If you look at the ones that we sell on Upcycle, and let me see, bring that picture up here. So you can see how that bottom slides up so you can get down to the bottom. You can take scoops out of the bottom and then put it back in the top again. So that'll help to stir it up like that. Stirring helps speed it up. It's not critical if you don't stir it. It just helps things to go a little bit faster. So, and then if you're having any issues or anything like that, it also helps you, like I said before, if it's too wet or something, you need to stir it. Otherwise, if you have a stationary one, like the pallets in the middle there, you can just take something like a pitchfork and just take a pitchfork and just flip it over, stick it right up in the middle, take a big scoop and flip it over.
Okay, Jamie, another question just came in on the question and answer. It says, can you add weeds?
Okay, good question. So I didn't really touch on the idea of a hot compost versus a cold compost. In a hot compost, you are regulating the temperature that it's at. And I am forgetting the exact temperature that it's supposed to be. For some reason, I'm thinking maybe 160. But in a hot compost, you're very closely monitoring the amount of browns and greens and how fast it's going so that the internal temperature stays high. When that happens, any of the seeds that are in there will be killed. Any of the pathogens, if you're cutting, say, a diseased apple tree or something like that, the pathogens are killed, the seeds are killed, and it's fine. If you're not managing it like that, they call it a cold compost. And it's not that it's cold, it's just that it's not as hot as your hot compost. In that situation, things are still breaking down. They're just not breaking down at a very high temperature. So you can put weeds in there, but you have to be careful about seeds. So if you put something like garlic mustard in there, I don't ever recommend putting garlic mustard in your compost because chances are really good, even if you pull it before it sets seed, it will continue to push all of its energy in there and it'll make seeds even after it's been pulled. So when you pull invasive stuff like garlic mustard, bag it and put it in the trash. So if you're catching things before they set seed, you can put them in there, should be fine. If you're putting things in there that are going, even things like tomatoes, I get tomato volunteers all over my garden from composting tomatoes. If you use that compost, you just have to understand you're probably going to be pulling weeds. So if it's in an area that, you're okay having a few weeds, that's fine. If it's in an area that you really don't want to have weeds, like maybe house plants or I don't know, your garden or something, then I would be careful about what seeds you put in that compost.
Okay, another question came in on the chat. It says, do you have to replace the worms or add worms in the Vermi compost? Good
question. If your Vermi compost is working, no. They will reproduce themselves, and it's kind of cool because their numbers will adjust based on how much you're feeding them. So in the summer, when we're getting tons of produce from our CSA, thank you, Green Earth Harvest at the Conservation Foundation CSA, when we have lots of produce and things like that we're putting in there, the number of worms, they'll actually multiply faster because there's more food available, just like in any kind of ecological system. And they will reproduce themselves enough to the level where they can handle everything that we're feeding them. In the winter, when we have less produce, they'll die back a little bit, not completely, as long as we continue to feed them and they've still got stuff to eat. But they'll die back a little bit so that they match the amount of food that we're putting in there. So if your bin is running properly, you shouldn't have to ever add more worms to it. Now, there can be situations where you may have a big die-off. Years ago when we were selling our house, we had our DIY worm bin, and because we were showing off the house, we thought people might think it was a little bit weird that there was a worm bin there. So we put that out in the garage. Our garage was not insulated at the time, and it got super hot, and our worms decided we're out of here. And there was a mass worm exodus on the garage floor because our garage was probably 100 degrees. They didn't like that at all. Also, if it gets super cold, they may also try to leave and go someplace else. In that case, our bin was basically done and we had to start over. But in a properly operating bin, there shouldn't be any issues. And your worms should just keep multiplying themselves. And it's a self-sustained system. It's really cool.
Okay, Jamie, we got a question from Lynn. She said she was sorry she had another meeting and she joined a little late, but she was wondering about bokashi composting. I don't know if you know anything about that. She'd like to learn and look into small scale compost.
Oh yeah, I have heard of it. I have read up a little bit on it, but I don't know a ton. So I'm going to direct you back to the internet for that one because I read up on it a little bit and I remember it sounded really cool. I haven't tried it though. So I don't have any direct experience with that, but I do remember it sounded cool and I wanted to look into it more.
So great job, Jamie. That's all the questions I see on our chat and in
Awesome.
the question and answers.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us. Again, if you have any questions either about compost or anything else, yard visits, whatever, I am more than happy to share my experience with you and the knowledge that I have. And again, if you're interested in purchasing a composter, please check out the link to Upcycle on our website. And if you want to watch this again, maybe you're bored and can't sleep tonight, check out our YouTube channel. We'll have the recording on there. So with that, I will say thank you and have a fantastic rest of your day, everybody. Bye.